The following program is made possible in part by a grant from the Ohio State Department of Education.
Last time, we talked about the sedimentary rock of Ohio and how it was formed from sediments. But not all sediments are formed into rock, because some sediments are never exposed to the conditions necessary to form rock. Here we have sand, gravel, and clay. Basically, they're all sediments that have not been formed into rock. Why do they look so different from each other? Well, remember, sediments are actually broken pieces of rock, and the sand, the gravel, and the clay are broken off from different types of rock. It would take a chemist or a geologist to determine exactly which rock they came from. But basically, this gravel was once the kind of rock we call limestone. But the sand comes from many kinds of rock. One major ingredient of this sand is quartz. And this clay contains a good deal of shale. All three, sand, gravel, and clay, are found over most of Ohio. If we were to draw an imaginary line right through the state of Ohio, like this would be the only area where we don't find large amounts of sand, gravel, and that kind of clay. Does that give you a clue about how this sand, gravel, and clay reached Ohio? It's found in areas covered by the great glaciers. And so we can assume that most of it was brought to Ohio by the glaciers. The glaciers, of course, were great walls of ice. And trapped within that ice were all kinds and sizes of rocks and sediment. Remember we talked about how the ice of the glaciers picks up rocks and sand and gravel? Watch. We'll let this ice on the stream table represent the glaciers that moved over Ohio. And the sand and gravel will represent the ground of Ohio. As I push the ice, the glacier, along, look, it picks up some of the sand and gravel from the ground. But eventually the climate grew warmer. The glacier stopped and the ice melted. The rocks and sediment that had been picked up by the glacier were left behind. Now we'll let our stream table glacier melt a little, while Laura tells you about some of that sand and gravel that was left behind by the glacier.
Today, that sand and gravel deposited so long ago is a valuable resource to the people of Ohio. In almost all the areas that were once covered by the glacier, you will find gravel quarries like this one near Kent, Ohio. Quite often, the sand and gravel was deposited in layers. In a quarry, large power shovels are used to remove the sand and gravel, which is then carried away in huge dump trucks. In another part of the quarry, the loads of sand and gravel are dumped onto a series of conveyor belts to separate the sand from the gravel. As the material passes over a group of different-sized screens, the sand and smaller pieces of gravel drop through the screens, each into separate piles of sand or gravel. Some of the gravel is actually rather large rocks. This smaller gravel can be used for concrete. The coarse-grained sand is often used for cement or concrete, and this very fine sand is often used in making glass.
Now, let's see what has happened to our stream table glacier. Where the glacier stopped, it left a moraine or hill of sand and gravel at its edge. And where the melted ice formed rivers and streams of water, that water carried more sand and gravel to deposit beyond the moraine. So a moraine, or this outwash area, would be a good place for a sand and gravel quarry, like the one Laura just showed you. Have you ever visited Lake Erie and seen a long stretch of sandy beach? Well, there's even more sand under the water at the bottom of the lake. That sand under the lake is moved around from one place to another by the water.
To find out how sand and gravel is removed from beneath the lake, we went aboard this sand barge and very early in the morning cast off from the shore to head out onto Lake Erie. The crew ate their lunch as the captain steered the boat, and we traveled about 6 miles away from shore. In the middle of the boat, there's a large empty space called the hold. Right now, it contains some rather muddy-looking water. When we return, the water will be gone, and the hold will be full of sand from the bottom of the lake. In Lake Erie, there are 3 places where the state of Ohio allows boats to dredge for sand. We've arrived at one of them now, and the crew gets ready to let down the boom, which will suck the sand up from the bottom of the lake. At first, the boom draws up water, which pours into the hold. But as you watch, you can see the sand gradually beginning to come up with the water. The water and larger rocks and gravel are sent back into the lake. In the wheelhouse, the captain steers the ship in a continuous circle as we dredge the sand from the bottom of the lake. He also uses his radio to stay in contact with the Coast Guard, which warns him about bad weather, like the storm that came up while we were out there. The radio also keeps him in contact with passing ships, like this ore boat, which passed by in the rain. It takes about 1.5 hours to get our full load of sand. Then it's time to close down the pump and pull up the boom. As you can see, in spite of the rain, we managed to fill the hold with sand. Sand so tightly packed that you can run across it, dodging the raindrops, of course. The waves are pretty high, even though the storm is almost over. There's no danger, but with such a heavy load of sand, the boat is riding low in the water, and the huge waves wash right over the deck. We were very surprised to arrive back in port and find the weather just as bright and sunny as when we had left, and to learn that there had been no storm or rain on shore. In no time at all, a large power shovel was unloading the sand from our boat. Members of the crew help with the unloading. The power shovel digs into the sand, lifts it out, and dumps it onto a conveyor belt, which carries it to a large pile of sand. It will remain there until it is to be used to make concrete.
And what about the clay? Well, some of the clay was deposited by the glacier in the same way as the sand and gravel. But clay is formed from shale, which is a very soft rock. So a lot of clay was formed and deposited millions of years before the glacier. That's why clay is found just about all over Ohio, even where there was no glacier. In 1788, the first settlers to arrive in Marietta, Ohio, used the clay they found to make bricks for the brick chimneys of their homes.
Modern Ohioans get some of their clay from a shale quarry. After it's removed from the ground, the shale is carried by a truck to another part of the quarry where it is crushed into a fine powder. Then a little water is added. It's carried along the conveyor belt. The very slightly moist powder is spread onto a set of molds. Tons of pressure slam the molds shut, and the powder is pressed into square tiles. The tiles are very fragile at this point. They move slowly along the conveyor belt, where they are dusted and sprayed with a glaze to give them color and to seal their porous surfaces. The tiles continue to move along to another part of the factory, where they are carefully placed in fireproof containers. The containers are then moved into a large kiln, which is like an enormous oven. Here the tiles are heated for 14 or 15 hours. After this heat treatment, they are more durable and don't need to be handled as carefully. They're packed in boxes and shipped out to be used in swimming pools. Next time you see a swimming pool, notice the Ohio tiles. Not all Ohio clay is made from shale. Some is quarried as clay. But the steps in the preparation of clay and shale are similar. The clay is ground up and then rolled into strips. A cutter machine slices the strips of clay into bricks, and the bricks are heated in a kiln. Some clay is formed by hand into large crocks or jars. Another part of the Ohio clay industry is involved in making flower pots. These are formed by machines. And then they're placed with other kinds of pottery in a large beehive-shaped kiln to be fired or heated for many hours. The door is closed and sealed, but by looking through this special observation hole, you can see that it's very hot inside the kiln.
Bricks, sewer pipe, dishes, all from Ohio clays and shale. And some of that clay, along with great quantities of sand and gravel, is another gift of the glacier. Come back next time, and we'll talk about some of our fuels that were formed from tiny animals.
The preceding program was made possible in part by a grant from the Ohio State Department of Education.